Hey everybody, it's really wonderful to see all of you. Um, so a few things on my mind. One is t this is the first of Av, which means it's the first of the saddest month of the Jewish calendar. Tisha B'Av, the ninth of Av, commemorates the destruction of both the first and second temples. So I remember I had a bit of a comeuppance 20 years ago when I was studying at an Orthodox institute, the Shalom Hartman Institute in Yerushalayim. And it was one of the times in the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. And I bumped into an Orthodox rabbi friend, and he was eating on Tisha B'Av. And I said to him, "Hey man, you're eating on Tisha B'Av." And he said, "Why shouldn't I?" I said, it's like it's a fasting day. The temple's destroyed, and we're standing in Jerusalem. He says, "Mordechai, we're back." I said, you got a point there. We're back. He says, listen, if you're going to be someone who commemorates things in history, you got to recognize when history feels uncomfortable, he told me. But one reason I do this out in public is exactly so people like you come up to me and say, how can you have a kippah on your head and eat? So he can say, folks, it happened in history, and this happened in history. And if you're going to commemorate that, don't ignore this. So I fell right into it, and glad I did. It was one of those moments that really touched me. Um, I still can't bring myself to eat on Tisha B'Av. It's been so long, but I know we're back. My theme for the past last week and this week is something I can't quite name. It came up when I thought about the parents who asked me, should our boy have a bar mitzvah? And I said, does your son have a soul? And we talked about it for a moment, and they agreed he did. And then I said, well, what are you doing about that? And they said, well, are you saying a bar mitzvah program is going to take care of that? And I got out of the conversation because I wasn't convinced that any program, including our program, really would address the needs of the soul. So I went through my head. I thought to myself, what would it mean if we could really train the teachers thoroughly? Whatever big curriculum we wrote, they would actually study it and deliver it. And what if we really had all the parents on board? What if the kids were really all on board? What kind of program would we create? Another part of it is you don't get to leave when you're 13. People start that great maturation up to about age 16. Could we really make a difference in people's lives? So oftentimes I've had the rumination. What would it really mean to provide a program where a young person could be brought into the world of depth, the world of truth, of love, justice, and beauty? And so I've oftentimes ruminated on that. And what I came up with was a text that confuses, difficult text. And last week I presented the difficult text of the blasphemer. I want to repeat it very shortly. And I wanted to make these in such a way that for some of you, it brings something in your life where you feel that the text sees you. So the first text is the guy who grows up in the Israelite camp. You remember the story. He has an Egyptian father. The Midrash says he's a taskmaster. An Israelite mother. The Midrash say that the man raped the woman. He's brought up in a patriarchal society where, because his father was not an Israelite, he didn't quite have a place. But I'm seeing him as something of a normal teenager who doesn't really think about these things too much. And he wakes up one day and says, wait, where do I belong? And up until this life, he's just been hanging out, with all the other kids who run away from their tribes and, play dice in whatever the Mount Sinai version of the alley was. And he says, well, I belong somewhere. He says, well, I think I'm a Danite because my mother's a Danite. And he goes over there and says, wait, your mother is from the tribe of Dan, but you're not because you don't have a Danite father. He goes, well, no, I never thought. So he goes around and no one will take him in, and I can see the tribal leaders all looking up at God. God goes, I don't know. I didn't see this coming. And so he goes back and tries to get in line. The tradition is he had a fight with somebody. And, what were they fighting about? He said, I'm going to stand in this line. Well, they fought. And our guy got more and more frustrated. I'm going to imagine more hurt, more enraged, more humiliated by being told, you don't have a place here. So he finally, in great frustration, blasphemes God. He says the worst thing you can say to God about God. and the whole place became here. And so they arrested him, and he had a trial. He says, "Yeah, I actually said it." And then he was stoned. And many times when people read the Bible looking for social justice and fighting for the poor, when I would mention that text, they would say, "Are you sure that's there? I don't remember anybody getting, executed in the Bible." I said, "Yeah, it's there. It's a very, very and let's every let's all turn our phones off. Can we get everybody silent, Yosh? Turn all the telephones off." Okay, that's a setting we're supposed to have before we start. All right, so and so when you read the text, number one, it's jarring. If you didn't know that it was coming and you're reading the Bible, you will never know that this text is coming. And so this week, I'm actually re-watching. I try to watch an hour of entertainment a day. So I'm re-watching a TV show called Suits. Has anybody seen Suits? Raise your hand if you've seen Suits. Okay. Well, there's this character in the series who basically embodies the Yetzer Hara. He has no restraint mechanism. Brilliant, but gets things wrong. Lewis Litt, ironically, and just shut up. Just close your mouth. Don't do the next thing. And you see him get himself into a tizzy, and he does horrible wrong. And as the season goes up, he actually does very, very illegal, destructive things. And there's parts where it's just a TV show, but I wanted to cover my eyes. I felt so embarrassed for him and so embarrassed for the series. And then the writers, were you embarrassed when you wrote this? And the actor, like, when they said cut, did he look at everybody and say, like, that's actually not who I am. That's just an act. But the show succeeded in making me feel so deeply physically uncomfortable that a person lost all restraint. There were law and justice at that time, he would have been disbarred and put in jail. And it didn't happen because he had something on somebody. So when I look at this guy in the case of the blasphemer, where he's just been boiling and boiling and boiling up, and then he has what I call a Lewis Litt moment where he just lets everything go, except there was law, there was order, there was a judge, and they said, you know what? You're gonna have the ultimate human version of getting disbarred. You can't be here anymore. We don't have a place for you. And he got stoned. I mean, what I put in the Shabbat thought was he got to the end of his rope about being ostracized, and then he really got to the end of his rope because he was put to death. So that's a jarring message. And whenever I've studied this with young people, first, they're mad at the Torah. They're really mad at the Torah. I said, okay, let's all be mad at the Torah. That doesn't take very long. I can get mad at Torah a lot. Question is, does this actually happen with people? They get so offended, they get so hurt, they get so surprised that they come apart. I said, have you seen it in school? Have you seen one of your parents? People fall apart. And so I reflected to them, the Torah, there's this theory of literature called mimesis, where literature tries to reflect what human life is like, and then oddly, human life reflects what the text is like. I said, this is mimesis. You're seeing something that happens all the time. It makes you so uncomfortable. They just want to blame the Torah when the Torah is saying, I'm talking about you guys. We only got this material because we watch you so closely. So we're in this uncomfortable position that the text, in a way, reflects back and tells us who we are. So the next text coming up is the story of some Torah narratives to, as it were, be parallel to what happened centuries later. So in 586 BCE and 70 CE, the temple was destroyed, but the ancient rabbi said something happened in the Torah that set that into motion. So very, very briefly, if you're really interested, go back to chapters 13 and 14. I don't want to study it in detail, I just want to set it up. They arrived to the border of the land of Canaan. It took them about 6 weeks to get there, not 40 years. You'll see why 40 years in a moment. They send spies out to the land. And so here's what we don't see. They send the 12 spies out, and they're going through the land. And we don't see the people for whom the spies are going. All right, so here's my image of the people. They're traumatized. They're brutalized. I mean, they came out of Egypt not healed from their wounds. Um, the incident at Mount Sinai, again, I think had left everybody torn apart when they all began fighting with each other about the molten calf, and they haven't fully gotten over. These are not people who have themselves together. Getting out of Egypt, going to Mount Sinai, seeing the civil war at Mount Sinai, looking at all these people die, feeling both the shame of not having lived up to Torah on one hand, and the desire to live by Torah very unevenly set within them. Now they're taken to the borders of Canaan, and they're told, "You're going to fight." There's a few of us here that have been through military training, and we know it takes an entire year. People training the army. It takes a year to make a good private, make a good corporal, 3 years to make a good sergeant. You don't train a fighting force, in a month, especially when they haven't been paying attention. So my sense is the spies go out and they're saying to themselves, "Wow, I hope they're not going to find a battle ahead of us. Hope they're going to say, hey, let's go back and train for a year and get ready for this thing." Like secretly saying, "Please find something really wrong with this land because we are so not ready for this." Well, we, in our heroic reading of the Bible, the 12 spies go out, they come back, 10 spies say, well, it's a land that eats its inhabitants, and there's giants, and two people, Caleb and Joshua, say, no, we can do it, let's go. And all the recruits of the army are saying, actually, we're not ready. We're so not ready. So we blame them, that the spies said we felt like grasshoppers, and there were giants in the land. And all the guys, standing in the recruiting office are saying, yeah, we kind of feel like grasshoppers too. We don't know what to do. You just can't send us out there. And so you have this, people say, we want to go back to Egypt. Now, as long as this, I've been critiquing those people who wanted to go back to Egypt. What's back in Egypt? Go into the land. Caleb and Joshua says you can do it. You want to go back under Pharaoh? And all this time, I never sat and asked myself, what, imaginatively. I mean, it's a story, so we can imagine along with the characters. What was it like to feel profoundly unready for a moment in life that you hadn't thought about? God brought them out of Egypt. I think maybe they said, God's going to give us the land. They didn't have to fight their way out of Egypt. They went to Mount Sinai and God gave them the Torah. Say, okay, next God's going to give build some houses, build some farms, get on with life. And so the guy says, oh, no, no, you got to create yourself into divisions and regiments and battalions and got to organize yourself because you're going in now. This is Iwo Jima, folks. Get off those boats and storm those mountains. And they said, we're not ready. So what do they want to do? As, terrified recruits, let's just go back to Egypt. In Egypt, we had to work, but we weren't being sent into the face of, of machine guns and mortars and artillery. Clearly, I'm using modern metaphors. And as I was studying, I suddenly had very, really deep sympathy for the Israelites who did not want to go into Egypt. And I thought about the times in my life, in your life, where you said to yourself, I know this is happening. I just don't feel prepared. I just don't feel prepared. Now, I'll be autobiographical with you. The past 5 years, Mirav and I have felt we're not prepared for this. When the synagogue was shut down in March, we had been used to showing up every week to synagogue and putting on a really nice service with wonderful cantors and a wonderful room and great music. And then the government says, oh, by the way, you're shut down. And we have 1 week to figure it out. Like put a computer on the dining room table. We were completely famished. We had no idea what to do. Luckily, we had some good tech people around us, but still, on one hand, I wanted to see you, but this was too hard. So we had to get a big computer. So do I look here? Do I look there? Where's the sound? So, and then I had classes going on. Suddenly I went from basically teaching one night a week because everybody was isolated. I was doing 5 nights a week, sometimes 2 nights, 2 classes a night, because I don't want people to feel lonely, and, and someone said to me, Rabbi, you got to rest. I said, I got to keep this congregation together. There's no building and they got to know that we're here for them. Well, not knowing, fast forward to February 2023, right? I had to have, uh, um, uh, um, very serious heart surgery, a triple bypass. And I look back on it and think to myself, it didn't, I worked too hard. It didn't occur to me not to work hard because I was just saying, I've got to get through this. And Mirav was the same way. We woke up every day and said to ourselves, we've got to get through this. Of course, when you go back to the building and then we realize they shut us down again and appropriately people left the synagogue and people said they're going to be coming in droves. Actually, they left the synagogue in droves and we found ourselves impecunious and had to sell the building. Well, okay, we're going to build the best studio in the world, which we think we did. Well, the droves came online, a few hundred people online, but the droves did not. We built it and they did not come. We said, okay, we weren't prepared for this. And we just, said, okay, we're ready. We got to go. We're the Rabbi Rebbitzin and wonderful lay leaders. We're not backing down. And then, of course, October 7th happens. And y'all know the story with our daughter who was almost at the festival. And we weren't we weren't ready for that. We weren't ready for, we found a house to renovate. Well, all the workers were on the front. So the whole project was delayed 6, 8 months. The foreign workers left and the Israeli workers were all in Gaza and Lebanon. So we were like, it's been a whole year of, is this really happening? Is this really happening to us? What do? You get up every day, you put one foot in front of the other. And as I thought about, this reflecting on this past year, it's been about exactly a year since we got here. Um, I started looking at these texts differently. I started looking at these texts about people who didn't know how they got there, weren't prepared for it, weren't sure what to do. Now, far from us, we've muddled through. And again, thank you so much for your continued affirmation of that we are now and will be doing great things in the future with your donations. Our to be honest, our bookkeeper is still not quite getting it. She's never quite got it, but we're not taking the thumb off, and she's going to create an excellent project. But she's used to working for corporate. She works for us very part-time. So no, we don't want corporate. It's for a nonprofit organization. She says, but this. We said, no, no, that's not how we're doing it. And she has very little time. We have very little time. Well, we're gonna do that right. We have a Wix thing, right? We don't know how to run it, and we can't hire anybody to run it. So we keep saying to ourselves, well, our heart's in the right place. We show up every Friday night. People believe in us. It's all going to work out. But the main thing from my part is don't have another heart attack because already it all went. So as I'm looking at the Torah portion, I'm saying to myself, is there something in here for people who come to moments in life where you're absolutely not prepared, but you also can't say, can we pause? Right? Can we pause life for a minute so I can think about this and kind of get back? Well, I'm looking at some of your faces, and I know that many of you who've gone things in life for which you absolutely were not prepared. What I'm describing is nothing compared to what you have gone through. And you wish that you could have said, pause, I need to prepare for this, but it was just thrown at you. And there you were, up to your eyeballs. And all you could say to yourself is, well, I'm not quitting, I'm not running away, but I'm going to see myself through this terrible mess because other people's lives are at stake. And that's one thing I wanted to say to all of you nameless people. I know who you are, and I know who you are. You didn't quit. You didn't back down. You didn't surrender. You said, well, so I have to go on. Partly because other people are relying on me, and partly because I'm a person of dignity and honor. And if it's not figured out, then I will have to figure it out. So I think of the Israelites on the corner borders of Canaan, where Caleb and Joshua said, "Let's go," and God gets really mad at them. And I think they're saying, "Okay, be mad at us. Go ahead. You get angry at times, and all right, let's just be angry at us, God, because you brought us to something for which we are not prepared." And I looked at chapter 14. They're crying. They're crying. They're crying because they're disobeying God. I looked at it this way. They're crying out of shame. They're crying out, not of guilt, but We know we are not up to what history is demanding of us, and we don't know how to get there, but we know we are just paralyzed by what's happening. Certainly in my imaginative reconstruction, upset with God for taking them, without any basic training. They don't know how to wield a sword. They're just kind of thrown into battle. Reminds me, in the 1948 war, Holocaust survivors got off the boats, were given a gun, and told to go charge in. The most thing they ever ran was a company, 200 guys. Now there's battalions fighting. They never ran a battalion. They got slaughtered left and right. And you read this, and your heart is breaking. And afterwards, Ben Gurion said, I had no choice. We had to get Latrun to open up the road, and we had untrained troops and untrained officers, and we just did it anyway. Well, hundreds of people died who had never fired their weapons, never squeezed the trigger. And I look at that and I think to myself, and look at Ben Gurion, are you sure? Are you sure there was nothing you could have done? Are you sure you couldn't have taken a week and shown these guys at least which way the gun shoots and where the trigger is? Are you sure you couldn't have given a couple of weeks to help company commanders become battalion commanders and learn how to maneuver with each other? Make sure the radios are working. So I look at these things, and you know what these guys did? They got off the boat, landed in the new state of Israel. They were given rifles, shown how to cock it, prepare it, and they ran at the Jordanian troops behind the walls of Latrun and got mowed down, and they kept coming. They kept coming. Well, I look at that, I feel I feel very small compared to the bravery of that day. And we don't honor that battle enough. It's one of those battles that we don't like to talk about because it's not the valor of the 6 Days War, the 48 War. This was just young Holocaust survivors coming off the boat and getting mowed down by experienced trained soldiers. So last week's Torah portion and this week's Torah portion, I'm coming at it with a lot more empathy, certainly a lot more identification, looking at our life for the past 5 years, and looking at that sense as well. By the way, I want to share with you, many of our biggest supporters have said, you sold the building, you have enough. We our lay leadership, including Helena, said you can use it as a retirement fund. You can just retire quietly, and make an okay life for yourselves. Or you can do what you want to do and try to build a studio and do these things. And we said, we have a moral obligation to try. They said, you probably do, but we don't recommend it. And I looked at each other and said, we're gonna try, retire, take it easy. No, we're gonna stay at it. And you know, we look at ourselves today. Mirav's sleeping. I'm here with you. I just want to report to you autobiographically. I don't think I've ever really talked about what it's been like for us the past 5 years. That's why I'm permitting myself to do this. We said to ourselves, we couldn't live with ourselves if we retired. We couldn't live with ourselves. And partly because I look at your faces, and a lot of you are glad we're here, but if we weren't, you'd be somewhere else. But a lot of you, for many people, this is what you need. Like when you sign on a Friday night, you're really glad we're here. And then when something really bad happens, we have hundreds of people after October 7th that surprised us. It says, you're the place we want to go when something bad happens. So, Mirav and I realized we have something really important to do with our lives, as if we didn't know before. And so what do we do? My wife says, dear, you had a triple bypass. You just had a debilitating back surgery. Yeah, we are slowing down. That we're definitely slowing down. And finally the house is getting renovated. And we want to last for I'm 70, another 20 years. We really do, but we're staying in. And so I look at the Israelites. So what did they have to do? They want to sit out for 40 years. Now, we're not going to sit out for 40 years. We haven't sat out for one day, basically. But God looks at them and says, okay, we're going to pretend I'm punishing you, for the history books, to make it look like you guys did something wrong. So this is my own rumination. God says, I really messed up. What hurry was I in? I had thousands of years to conquer the land of Canaan. It's like the Bible's in such a big hurry. And God says, just let them rest for 40 years. Let a new generation come up. They need a sabbatical. Train the troops, go in. So I think there was a big, this is my my playful reconstruction. There was a whitewash. On one hand, they didn't want to say God does really not understand people. We're not even sure if God should maybe go to God boot camp and really try to figure people out. He keeps putting them in horrible situations. Okay, they don't want to put that in the book. In my playful rumination that's going on in the background. So God says, I'm officially mad at you. I'm officially ashamed of myself. So you all train yourselves, and we'll get at this 40 years later, and we'll move in there. So as I'm thinking about this, that's my basically my talk for tonight. Um, I went to a synagogue last night. So Mirav and Shuli and the girls have found an Orthodox synagogue, or they're just it's a Karlbach, very up Hasidic tunes. There's a men's section. Instead of I'll go through all this. Okay, then the next paragraph starts all over again. This is Psalm 107. Those who sat in darkness and the shadow of death, shackled in affliction and iron, because they rebelled against the words of God and scorned the counsel of the Supreme One. He humbled their heart with hard labor. They stumbled, there was none to help. They cried out to God in their distress that he would save them. God saved them. I'm thinking to myself, could you have shortened this a little bit? I mean, you are God and they were lost. Is there any way that those shackles could have not been so tight? Okay, another paragraph. Fools, because of their sinful path and their iniquities, were afflicted. Their souls abhorred all food. They reached until the portals of death. They cried out to God in their distress that he would save them. Okay, God saves them again. Verse 23. They go down to the sea in ships, and they do their work in great waters. They've seen the deeds of God in the watery deep. He spoke and raised the stormy wind and lifted its waves. They rise heavenwards. They descend to the depths. Their souls melt with trouble. They reel, they stagger like a drunkard, and all their wisdom is swallowed out. And they called to God in their distress. And I think to myself, I'm seeing a pattern here. Oh, you got that backwards, God. A fruitful land to a salty waste because of the evil of their inhabitants. I said, why don't you kind of correct them from being evil instead of destroying the climate? Um, uh, Anyway, so as I sat at this synagogue, I opened the prayer, turned around and went home, and so they're walking. They text me and said, "What happened?" I said, I got really sad. I had to go home." So how could you get so sad? Look at all that music. I said, "It's reading my Bible. You're reading the Bible and it makes you sad." I said, "It makes me so sad. I want to cry." And so I went home and went to sleep, and they're still sleeping, and I'm up. That was a deep thing for me because what I realized was happening was the teaching I was preparing tonight. And what this did is it brought me into the last 5 years of my life that I've never talked about. Never I with a smile because you're here, so I feel safe and good, and I know, we love each other. But I thought to myself, wow, like I had triple bypass, I had a bad back, and the building's gone, and we're still standing. So anyway, for those of you who have felt this psalm, you're saying it is so awful. When is this going to end? What is happening to me? Or the blasphemer, like, why does everybody hate me? Why are people so mean to me? This is the blasphemer. Or I'm not ready for this moment in life. I have no preparation for this. It was just thrown upon me. God, I'm not ready for this. So I know many people that I know, this is what life feels like. I mean, I've seen marriages fall apart where some other person wasn't prepared for, or children suddenly discover that their parents are not nice people. And, oh, I can give you so many lists of people that said, I don't know how I got here. I'm not prepared for this. People are not who I thought they were. And I'm still standing. I'm not folding my cards. I've got to get through this, but I don't know what inner reserves I'm going to go to get through this because I've never had this before. I've spoken to so many people going through this, and this was before 2020. They said, Rabbi Finley, have you ever gone through anything like this? I said, no, not yet, but I think I have some counsel. Well, now, now I have plenty of counsel for these tough, unpredictable times. So allow me to look at this narrative from a slightly darker side where, as it were, the divine has such hope and faith in us, and then realizes, uh-oh, they're not ready. Well, what does God do? Gets the writers out, whitewash it, and then kind of quietly behind the scenes hold us and heal our souls and talk to us and teach us. Is like, I'm really sorry I threw you into that. I'm going to try to heal you and help you out, kind of nudge you back into life. And God's saying, I really am going to try to do this differently. So I sat here in all of this, and I don't have a final word other than um, something within us, something within you has helped you stand back up, filled with your dignity, filled with your vision, filled with your honor, and say, look, life can be tough, life can knock me down, but I'm not staying down. I'm getting back up. And so maybe that's a secret name for our gathering tonight. We who get back up and